Welcome to the Paper Trails and Rabbit Holes podcast.
And welcome to the deep end of the data pool.
Today, we are taking a look at something that is likely sitting in a glass on your desk right now. It's a topic that flows through the taps of nearly 3/4 of American homes. For the last 80 years, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, has hailed this as one of the top 10 public health achievements of the 20th century, right up there with vaccinations and motor vehicle safety. We are talking, of course, about community water fluoridation.
It's the gold standard, well, it was.
It absolutely remains the gold standard for the majority of the public health community. I'm here to represent that case, the massive body of evidence showing how a simple mineral adjustment has saved billions in dental costs, prevented unnecessary surgery for millions of children, and acted as a critical safety net for the poor. It is, in my view, a triumph of pragmatic governance.
And I'm here to act as the risk assessor. I'm not here to indulge in internet folklore, but I am here to walk us down the rabbit hole of the actual toxicology reports. Because while you call it a victory, there is a surge of data, specifically the 2024 monograph from the National Toxicology Program and, recent federal court rulings that suggest the ground is shifting beneath our feet. We're looking at narrowing safety margins, legitimate neurotoxicity concerns, and a legal determination that the current levels pose an unreasonable risk.
It is arguably the biggest conflict in modern environmental health. On one side, you have the weight of institutional consensus, the American Dental Association, the CDC, the history of success. On the other, you have this new wave of research questioning whether the optimal level for teeth is actually safe for the developing brain. But before we get into the heavy science, and we will get very technical today, we have to clear the air. We need to address the rabbit hole that most people stumble into first.
Right. You're talking about the pacification theory.
Exactly. If you type fluoride into a search engine and scroll past the first page, you inevitably find the claim that fluoride was never about teeth at all. The theory goes that it was historically deployed by the Nazis or the Soviets or even the U.S. government to mass pacify the population. The idea is that it induces submissiveness, reduces willpower, and effectively turns the populace into manageable zombies.
I've read those threads. It's a classic rabbit hole entry point. The core concept is that fluoride targets the, quote, will of the people, making them docile subjects who won't rebel. To be fair to the listeners, this is where a significant amount of the skepticism originates. It creates this lens of malevolent intent through which they view the whole program.
Stop it right here, strictly looking at the data in the source material. We applied a stress test to this theory. First off, historians have thoroughly debunked the Nazi and Soviet connections. Those stories are pure Cold War rhetoric. There's no paper trail, no orders, no supply logs proving they used it for mind control. But more importantly, let's look at the clinical reality. If fluoride were a sedative or a pacifying agent, we would see clinical evidence of narcotization in the population.
That's a fair point. If it worked like a tranquilizer, we'd know by now.
Precisely. We don't see it. At the optimal level of 0.7 milligrams per liter, there is zero clinical documentation of sedation, impaired executive function regarding willpower, or increased behavioral compliance. The source material explicitly states that behavioral claims regarding submissiveness lack any peer-reviewed empirical support. To validate that hypothesis, you would need to see a dose-response relationship where communities with higher fluoride intake show more, politically compliant behavior. That data simply does not exist.
I will concede that point. The biological plausibility for that specific type of behavioral control, turning us into zombies, it isn't there. It sounds like science fiction because, well, it largely is. However, and this is the crucial pivot, just because it doesn't make you docile doesn't mean it isn't affecting your brain.
I sense we're moving from folklore to the 2024 monograph.
We are, because the pacification myth actually distracts from the real chemical brain drain. The true rabbit hole isn't about behavior modification, it is about neurotoxicity. We aren't talking about mind control, we are talking about cognitive decline. The source material highlights that massive 2024 National Toxicology Program, or NTP, monograph and a 2025 meta-analysis that should make every parent pause.
Let's be precise with that data, though. When you say cognitive decline, what are we actually measuring?
We are measuring IQ. The meta-analysis indicates a decrease of 1.63 IQ points for every 1 milligram per liter increase in urinary fluoride. Now, 1.63 points might sound small to a layperson. You might think, who cares about 1 or 2 points? But in public health, shifting the entire population curve down by nearly 2 points is catastrophic. It increases the number of children classified as intellectually disabled and drastically reduces the number of children in the gifted range.
That is assuming the correlation is causal and linear at low doses. But continue, you mentioned we know the mechanism, because often these correlations are just statistical noise without a clear biological pathway.
We actually do know the mechanism now, and this is where the summary helps, because the science is dense. It's not magic, it's biochemistry. The fluoride ion is small enough to cross the blood-brain barrier and the placenta. Once it's in the brain, it accumulates in specific regions. The report details 2 main mechanisms. First is oxidative stress,
Which is essentially rusting at a cellular level, correct?
in simple terms, yes. Fluoride induces the overproduction of reactive oxygen species. These are, unstable molecules that damage cells. It sabotages the brain's antioxidant defense systems, inhibiting enzymes like glutathione peroxide. So this leads to mitochondrial dysfunction. Your neurons literally face an energy crisis and begin to die off.
And the second mechanism.
Rely on phosphate. It turns out aluminum fluoride complexes can mimic the phosphate group in the brain's energy cycles. They act as a false signal in the brain's communication network. They interfere with neuronal regulation at concentrations much, much lower than what is required for fluoride alone. So you have false signals, dying mitochondria, and oxidative stress. That is not pacification. That is brain damage.
I appreciate the breakdown, and I see why you frame it that way. It sounds daunting when you get into the cellular weeds, but let me apply the public health lens to those numbers. You mentioned the 1.63 IQ point drop per milligram increase. We have to look at the dose. The United States Public Health Service recommends a level of 0.7 milligrams per liter. The source material explicitly states that while the evidence is strong for high exposure, often found in studies from China or Mexico with high natural fluoride, the evidence for cognitive harm at that specific 0.7 U.S. level is, quote, characterized by statistical uncertainty and high heterogeneity.
Statistical uncertainty is a very polite way for the government to say we can no longer prove it's safe.
It means the data is mixed. The poison is in the dose. That is the fundamental rule of toxicology. You can drink water, but if you drink 5 gallons in an hour, you die of hyponatremia. We cannot take studies from endemic areas with naturally high fluoride and apply them one-to-one to the controlled U.S. water supply. Public health policy relies on broad averages and career benefits. We are balancing a moderate confidence correlation against a proven rock-solid reduction in disease.
But are we looking at the averages correctly? You're relying on the idea that 0.7 is some magic wall where toxicity just stops.
I'm relying on the fact that this program works. We aren't just pouring chemicals for fun. This is a utilitarian necessity. Let's talk about the tangible reality of why we do this.
Okay, let's talk utility. Is it worth it?
Absolutely. The data is undeniable. Community water fluoridation reduces cavities, dental caries, by 25% across all age groups. That is a massive reduction in disease burden. In economic terms, it saves $32 per person per year in avoided dental costs.
$32?
Multiply that by a city of 1 million people. That is $32 million explicitly saved from the economy of disease. But it's not just about money, it's about justice.
Justice? That's a strong word for dentistry.
It is the only word for it. Tooth decay is a disease of poverty. Wealthy families can afford private dental care, sealants, high-end treatments. Poor families cannot. For millions of marginalized people, the tap water is their only safety net. It's the only passive preventative measure they receive. If you remove it, you are disproportionately hurting the poor. You are taking away a social leveler that keeps the playing field somewhat even.
That is a compelling argument, and I respect the intent behind it. No one wants poor children to suffer from tooth decay. But I just don't buy that fluoridation is the only way or even the best way anymore. We have to look at the global comparison. You say we need this to prevent cavities, but if you look at the European model, the data tells a completely different story.
Europe is often cited, but their systems are different.
The outcome isn't. The vast majority of Western Europe, 97%, does not fluoridate their water. Germany, France, the Netherlands, they don't do it. And yet their tooth decay rates have dropped at similar rates to the United States over the last 50 years. Why? Because they use fluoride toothpaste,
Which is widely available here, too. But usage isn't universal.
Exactly. But that brings us to the key distinction the source makes: topical versus systemic. Fluoride works best when it touches the enamel directly. You brush it on your teeth, you spit it out. You treat the tooth. You don't drink it. You don't bathe your developing fetus in it. When you put it in the water, you are ignoring the safety margin, which is effectively zero at this point.
Zero seems like hyperbole. We have safety standards.
Do we? Let's look at the numbers in the report. The target level in the water is 0.7 milligrams per liter. The World Health Organization's safety threshold is 1.5 milligrams per liter. That is a tiny buffer. The EPA's aesthetic limit for fluorosis, which is scarring of the teeth, is 2.0 milligrams per liter. But it gets worse when you look at vulnerable groups, infants.
You're referring to formula-fed babies?
Yes. This is a critical point for parents. An infant drinking formula reconstituted with fluoridated tap water often exceeds the EPA reference dose, which is 0.06 to 0.08 milligrams per kilogram per day. Because babies are so small, that water puts them over the limit. We are literally overdosing babies relative to their body weight during their most critical developmental window.
But does that momentary peak translate to long-term harm? The body clears fluoride relatively quickly.
The data suggests it might not clear it fast enough for the developing brain. Look at pregnant women. The Canadian data cited in the source shows that 14% of pregnant women in fluoridated regions already have urinary fluoride levels exceeding 1.0 mgl. That is the exact threshold associated with those neurodevelopmental risks we discussed earlier.
I'm not convinced that those peaks represent a systemic failure of the policy.
14% is not a peak, it's a significant portion of the population. So I have to ask you the hard question. Is saving $32 a year on dental fillings worth risking a child's cognitive development? Is that a fair trade? Because toothpaste works just as well without the systemic risk to the brain. We are effectively trading cavities for IQ points.
We are preventing a guaranteed disease, dental caries, which causes pain, infection, and missed school, in exchange for avoiding a theoretical risk that is still being debated in the literature. And this brings us to the legal framework. You talk about overdosing, but legally, this isn't a drug.
Oh, I think the courts are starting to disagree with you there.
Let's look at the precedent. We have to go back to 1905, Jacobson versus Massachusetts. The Supreme Court ruled that a community has the right to protect itself against disease. In that case, smallpox. This established the police power of the state. It allows for reasonable regulations that might infringe on individual choices for the common good. For decades, courts have viewed fluoride not as a medication, but as a nutrient or water treatment like chlorination. Chlorination treats the water to make it safe. Fluoride fortifies it. It's no different than iodine in salt or vitamin D in milk.
That was the argument for 80 years. It's a nutrient. It's a fortification. But that defense just crumbled. We have to talk about the modern legal challenge. The 2024 TSCA ruling, Food and Water Watch versus the EPA. This is a game changer that most people haven't heard about yet.
It is a significant ruling. I acknowledge that. But it hasn't banned fluoride.
Significant? It's revolutionary. A federal court explicitly ruled that current fluoridation levels pose an unreasonable risk to human health.
They didn't say it might be risky, they said the risk is unreasonable under the Toxic Substances Control Act. This shifts the entire definition. The opponents argued, and the court seemed to listen, that fluoride is unlike chlorination. Chlorine treats the water to kill bacteria. Fluoride treats the person.
That distinction is semantic.
It is bioethical. It violates the principle of autonomy and informed consent. If a doctor wants to give you a drug, they need your consent. They need to control the dose. When you put a bioactive substance in the water supply, you are mass medicating the population without consent. You cannot effectively opt out. Reverse osmosis filters are expensive. Bottled water is expensive.
But the intention matters. The intention is to prevent disease.
But the mechanism matters more. It is a prophylactic drug delivered without a prescription and, crucially, without dosage control. You don't know if I'm drinking 1 liter or 5 liters. You don't know if I'm a 200-pound man or a pregnant woman with a thyroid condition. The police power argument falls apart when the substance causes bodily harm.
But the court ruling, as you noted, didn't ban fluoridation. It simply mandated that the EPA address the risk. It doesn't invalidate the police power of the state to manage public health. The state still has a compelling interest in preventing dental disease. Look, if we start classifying every public health measure as mass medication because it touches the body, we lose the ability to manage public health at all.
But we draw the line at neurotoxicity. That's where the police power argument fails. The state has a right to stop smallpox. Does the state have a right to lower the IQ of the population to save money on fillings? That is the ethical showdown we are in right now.
I think you are jumping to a conclusion that the science hasn't fully cemented yet. You are taking a moderate confidence signal, which in scientific terms means maybe, and treating it as a proven catastrophe.
And you are taking a Depression-era dental policy and treating it as some sacred cow that cannot be questioned.
I'm treating it as a public health victory because the scoreboard says it is. We have to look at the aggregate good. We have a program that reduces disease by 25%. It is equitable. It is cost-effective. The public health case remains strong. If we dismantle this program based on emerging heterogeneous data, we are taking a regressive step. We will see a spike in dental disease, and as always, the poor will suffer the most. We should not throw out 80 years of success because of a narrowing safety margin that we can manage with better monitoring.
Better monitoring doesn't fix the fact that the margin is effectively gone. I come at this from the precautionary principle. When the data shifts, we have to shift. We are no longer in 1945. We have fluoride in our toothpaste, our processed food, our dental gels, our tea. We are saturated. The margin between the therapeutic dose for teeth and the toxic dose for the brain is too narrow to justify mass deployment in the water supply.
We have managed narrow margins in public health before.
Not with the developing brain. The TSCA ruling signals that the era of blind trust in the tap is over. We have to face the possibility that we are trading oral health for neurological health. And frankly, with toothpaste available, that is a trade we don't need to make.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because it assumes individual responsibility like buying and using toothpaste will fill the gap left by systemic support. History shows it usually doesn't. People fall through the cracks. But I think we have illuminated the core tension here perfectly. It is a battle between the proven utility of the past and the emerging risks of the future.
It certainly is. And for those listening, this is one paper trail you definitely want to follow yourself. The 2024 NTP monograph is public. The court ruling is public. Don't take our word for it.
Agreed. This is a conversation that is going to evolve rapidly in the next few years as the EPA responds to the ruling. Thank you for joining us on the Paper Trails and Rabbit Holes podcast.
Keep asking questions. We'll see you next time.